to identify yourselves, project.
Mark Mannion with the Congressional Research Service. Thanks for a really interesting talk. I'm going to make a real quick, violate your rule and make a real quick statement, which is that I remember when the 10-year warranty came out, I was meeting with a Hyundai official here in Washington, and I asked him, I said, how long is the average ownership of a car? Because the warranty only goes first time to original owners, and with sort of a twinkle in his eye, he said, 6-point-something years. So there was a lot of strategy going into that warranty program, clearly. It was a sound business decision, financially, as well as a good marketing one. But my question is, you talked about the myth of penetrating the Korean auto market. And I take what you're saying, but the reality is that the Korean auto manufacturers have had this market essentially to themselves. And even companies like Honda, which have tried to penetrate the market with smaller size autos, haven't succeeded. Of course, this was after the Koreans dropped their restrictions on allowing Japanese auto imports. So could you talk about, how important it is to have this essentially closed market that they could then use, guaranteed to use as an export platform, and then B, a little bit more about what the government's role has been in helping to foster and develop the auto industry.
Okay. I would say, let's see. I just want to make one comment on your comment. There was a new Hyundai program called the Assurance Program last year when car owners were so worried about losing their jobs they weren't purchasing cars. So Hyundai introduced a program that said, if you get laid off, we will take the car back. It made an enormous amount of news and positive publicity for Hyundai. But as another example, I heard an interview with John Krafchuk, the Hyundai CEO, Hyundai North America CEO, when he asked how many cars they took back. At first, he wouldn't answer the question, but in the end, they only took back less than a dozen cars, if I remember that interview correctly. So they got a lot of publicity for that program, too, and a lot of positive response to that program, but it didn't cost them a lot of money. So again, an example, I would call that creative marketing. It's always creative to not have to spend a lot of money on things. So in response to your question about the domestic market in Korea, I think what the reason why I said what I said about the fact the real issue is small cars. If you look at the negotiations, the changes that were negotiated with the Chorus FTA, which is yet to be ratified and completed, and I don't want to get into the Chorus FTA issue too much, but I would say this: if you look at what the United States negotiated away from and Korea gave up in the Chorus FTA having to do with cars, it mostly had to do with regulations having to do with the displacement of the engine, meaning we're going to allow bigger cars. So it wasn't specifically regulations that said no American cars allowed into this market. It was regulations that demanded that the cars be small, essentially. And the way to compete, the way that the North American car industry is attempting to compete with that is to say, okay, let's change those regulations and allow big cars in. Now, the Chorus FTA is, as I said, it's not finalized, but that gives you a clue as to what the actual stumbling blocks to North American car entry into that field is. And one of the largest manufacturers of cars in the Korean market is owned by GM. It's GM Daewoo. They are a player in that market. Yes, they're manufactured in Korea, but it is the majority owner of that car company. So in that sense, I think it's a little unfair to say that North American car companies are not playing in the Korean market. That is a GM-owned company.
I guess I'm going to abuse my privileges as moderator of today's conversation. Myung and Sam, you, in your book chapter, in your presentation today, you have said that Hyundai did a better job emerging out of the 1997 financial crisis, and that Daewoo chose to basically invest and spend its way out of that crisis, which didn't work out that well. Some of us, or many of us, know that prior to the 1997 crisis, and you mentioned this in your presentation, Daewoo had invested rather heavily in Eastern Europe, in Romania, in Poland, and in Uzbekistan. The Daewoo production facility in Romania, for example, was quite successful. It managed to revitalize the local auto industry, to create jobs, and basically Daewoo's were the car of choice for quite a few years, and there are many who still say that, well, Daewoo failures there was pretty much due to the 1997 financial crisis and what happened at headquarters. It was not related to the merits of the actual field operation that they managed there. FSO in Poland was pretty much the same case. As many of you know, FSO was the producer of the iconic Polski Fiat for many years. Daewoo invested there. Then for similar reasons, they had to wind down their operation in the early 2000s. I guess I have broken my own rule by making a statement. Are there any lessons to be learned from this rather paradoxical situation where one is experiencing this type of trouble at home and at the same time the field operations seem to be managed and conducted in the right fashion? What could we learn from the Daewoo adventure, let's call it, in the 1990s?
That's a very interesting question, because when you look at the parts that were sold off of Daewoo, Daewoo went into complete bankruptcy actually shortly after the real crisis situation of the IMF crisis years. But it essentially was the sacrificial lamb of the Korean economy, in the same way that Lehman Brothers was our sacrificial lamb in this current crisis. It was allowed to go belly up. It was supposedly too big to fail, but it turned out that wasn't the truth. But if you look at the parts that were sold off, for the most part, they are being controlled by other companies now, but they are doing very well. And that's an example of the Daewoo operations in Eastern Europe. And they successfully entered that market, dominated that market, and did very well in that market. And it's just, I think the primary lesson learned here is you got to tend your home fires first. And when you're managing the larger corporation as a whole into a ditch, all the parts go with it. And that's unfortunately that Daewoo, the company, never got to realize the beneficial choices it made in Eastern Europe. And for that matter, the Daewoo car company, GM Daewoo, is a successful organization today, and it was one of the few bright spots that GM has had in the last few years.
Yeah, Dave Fitzgerald, private consultant. I was wondering if you could talk a little bit more about this, I think you called it the integrated approach to parts.
Vertical integration.
Vertical integration. Is that likely to continue, or as Hyundai's sales volumes increase in this country, to be more pressure for local part suppliers to be integrated into that system, rather than producing jobs in Korea?
Right. I certainly think that I don't want to get my comments misunderstood in the sense that Hyundai has an enormous supply network, and it's not a matter that it makes all its parts in-house, but it makes more of its parts in-house than most car companies do, and it has chosen that as a strategic choice. And I do think that will continue. And I think that will, Hyundai Kia have, I believe, 2 factories in the United States today. There's possibility that there will be more in the near future. And I think that the chances of those parts being made in the United States are just as great. I don't see that as being necessarily a detractor to the number of jobs that would be created in a U.S. factory.
Charles Chung from Korea International Trade Association. Regarding the Korea-U.S. FTA, the outstanding issues on the auto industry, and the issue is mostly on the market access issue, and you mentioned a little bit on that. And you said that